Suspension training exercises, practical part 3, core and stretches. So the objectives of this presentation is to give an overview of the core suspension training exercises, provide coaching points and application for each exercise or variation, give an overview of example static suspension system stretches. It's also to provide guided practice for the exercises and give example core sessions to follow. So part 1, well, this presentation is going to look at the prone plank exercise and variations, focusing predominantly on the anterior core. So we're going to look at the plank progressions and variations, extending plank, and the jackknife and variations. So first of all, then we're going to look at the suspension system prone plank on the elbows. This is going to work the anterior core, shoulders, and the scapular stabilizing muscles. On the coaching side, key things you want to get across: that you want the individual to brace the core and the glutes in order to help maintain normal lumbar curvature. Generally, this is the key area we're kind of looking at. If someone loses this position, then we're going to see increased lumbar extension or an increased curve in their low back. So to help maintain good posture, you coach them to lift the sternum, keep the head aligned and the shoulders pulled in tight. So to regress the exercise, make it easier, you would shift them backwards in order to decrease the any pendulum swing force effects. You can progress it by moving them forward in order to increase the pendulum swing force. In this case, it will be a marginal kind of increase since there isn't actually any movement per se, but you will feel a bit of a difference depending on where you have the start position. This is obviously a static exercise, so we're going to be holding it for duration, might be 20, 30, 60 seconds. So here we see it's being performed then. So you adjust the start position. Individual is going to get onto their elbows, forearms, whichever way you just kind of describe it. Generally you want the kind of elbows just underneath the shoulders, although you can vary that position. And we're just holding this position statically. You want them to continue to breathe, but we do want them to kind of brace the core to maintain that position. When they finish, bring their knees up, place them on the ground, and then have a rest and repeat. So variations of this, well, obviously the simple variation is extending the arms and coming up onto the hands. This does change it very slightly. It's going to mean you have a slightly less stable base. Obviously with the hands versus the forearms, it's less contact with the floor. It's also going to be more shoulder and thoracic stability required with the arms extended. You're going to get a little bit more tricep activation as well. But again, same variation if you were doing a plank without the suspension system on the hands or on the forearms. So other little tweaks. We usually kind of do the same type of thing that we would do with a client if they weren't using a suspension system. Holding a plank is a perfectly good exercise, but clients can get a little bit bored with it. So we do tend to kind of add these little tweaks in, if you like, in order just to give them a little bit of variation. As much as anything, it helps to distract the mind so you're not just holding that same one position for a period of time. So simple little tweaks, we could do a plank with a chest tap. So what we're going to do is just lift one hand off the ground and just kind of touch the opposite shoulder or the opposite pec. What this does is, again, it will decrease the base of supports. It will also mean you have to control that kind of rotational or transverse stress that will occur once you lift one hand off the ground. We could also do that with a plank with a reach through, as you kind of see with the background image, where we lift the hand up and then kind of try to feed it through the other side. And you can keep the shoulders facing downwards. So again, it's kind of rotational stability, or you can actually get them to deliberately rotate through to try and reach through a little bit further. We could go plank forearms to hands. So you start off on the forearms or the elbows, and then move up onto one hand, up onto the other hand, back down to the elbows, and again repeat for a duration. Again, this is just going to alter the base of support. There's going to be a little bit of transverse force or rotational force that we need to control. The feet will also want to kind of shift side to side in that kind of open chain position. So again, we want to try to decrease any lateral movement of the feet while that's occurring. We can also go plank wide to narrow. So this would be done on the hands, and all we would do is just shift one hand out to the side, the other hand out to the side a bit further, so for a kind of wider grip or stance, and then bring the hands back underneath, and you're just going in and out repeatedly for duration of the set. We could also do T planks. So probably familiar with kind of T press up, like we kind of showed you earlier. T plank is pretty much the same, except we're not actually doing the press up part of it. So you'd start on your hands, and again, we would just lift one hand up and rotate upwards to get into that kind of T type position. So again, it's kind of more rotational control. You're actually deliberately trying to rotate the torso as well now. The other one we could do, plank with a single arm. So a lot of those previous variations, we're lifting one hand up. You can just perform the whole set with one hand lifted off the ground and just held, or we could add different arm movements. So you could be reaching up forwards and backwards, a kind of flexion extension, or we could do a kind of arm swing out to the side. So going through like a full abduction, adduction movement, just to add a little bit of additional stress. That will get pretty tough on that shoulder. Obviously there's going to be a lot of rotator cuff activation as well. So, but supporting the whole weight on one arm for 30 or 60 seconds is going to get pretty tough. We can also do a plank with a single leg. So this is a little bit different to doing it with one hand. So we just have one foot in the straps. And what this does is usually when you hold a plank, you kind of get to use both hip flexors and you kind of effectively using the core and those kind of anterior hip for that stability. Obviously when we take one leg out, you kind of lose that side. So you are going to get a little bit more hip and core overload because you're only using kind of one leg for stability. Because as one leg is out, we're also going to get more rotational stress. And again, if you want to add different leg movements with that free leg, then you could do a leg sweep or a knee lift. It's going to be unresisted, but again, it's just to add a little bit of variation to it. So here we see one of these variations. This is the prone T plank. So we can do that kind of feed through as well, or you can just lift the arm up and then come straight out into rotation. So again, if you're focusing on the feet, as soon as that hand lifts off the ground, there's a big kind of lateral shift that the core and the hips need to control in order to maintain that kind of foot position. So this is one of my favorite exercises. This is the prone plank extending, or the extending plank. Very tough on the anterior core, on the shoulders, tricep muscles, scapular stabilizers. It's a tough exercise. We usually kind of describe this as very similar to like the rollout exercises when you got those kind of ab rollers. You maybe do it off your knees or off your feet and you just kind of roll forward and then back. In that case, the hands are moving and the kind of the lower body or the hips are kind of fixed. In this case, with the hands on the ground, the hands are fixed and we're actually kind of moving the feet, which are a little bit more free to move whilst they're in the suspension straps. So coaching wise, really critical. Again, you get them to brace the core and glutes in order to maintain that normal lumbar curvature. And rather than focus on reaching up, so if you look at that background image, effectively you are ending up with your hands a little bit higher up than your shoulders than they started. But the trick is you can't really coach that. You have to get them to focus on pushing the feet backwards. So you start in a plank position. As a PT, you usually kind of position yourself, a half a foot behind their feet. Hold your hand out and just kind of say, just push your feet backwards to touch my hand. Again, critical with this, you want to focus on quality rather than quantity or range of movement. So there's no much point in them trying to do a full range if it's rubbishy quality. Even if it's just a small range, if it's good, that's much more preferable. So the regression, again, we can start further back with a smaller range of motion, and then to progress it, we just get them to move further forwards beyond the anchor point, and you increase the range of motion. So here we see this in action then. So we start off in our plank position, shoulders kind of over the hands, and we brace the core and keeping the legs, torso nice and rigid. You're going to push the feet backwards, half a foot, and again, the range is very much decided by their anterior core strength. If they're quite weak, you're going to find they have a very limited range of motion. Or if they do try to go further, then you're just going to collapse through the lumbar curve or the lumbar spine. Another variation, so a little bit more dynamic. This is what we refer to as plank walks. So we get into our plank position and then you're just going to walk your hands forward, obviously one at a time. Again, as soon as you shift one hand and move it forward, as you see, if you watch the feet want to shift from side to side. So the key with this is you're trying to limit the lateral sway as much as possible and control that lateral movement through the core muscles. Then we have plank lateral swings. And in this case, you're actually deliberately trying to shift the feet from side to side. Critical with this, you do need to have some space either side of you. Now we can do this where we keep the torso quite rigid and you don't have any hip flexion. With the video you see we are getting a little bit of hip flexion as well. So this is almost like a straight leg jackknife with rotation, you could describe it as. But you can just keep limit the hip flexion and just swing the legs from side to side. Like I said, you do need a reasonable bit of space either side of you. We don't tend to see this drill done quite so often as some of the others, but it is a nice drill. But yeah, it's quite infrequently performed. And then we have our pike. So what we're doing here is you keep the legs straight, and what you're trying to do is lift your hips up and over the shoulders. Big limitation with this one is someone's hamstring mobility. So if they're very tight in the hamstrings, you're going to find that it is going to limit their range of motion. For the more advanced person, if you want to progress it, we can then add a little shoulder press in once they've got to that pike position. But it's quite a nice drill just to mobilize the hips as well as kind of working the anterior core muscles. Particularly with females with better hamstring range of motion, they tend to be able to perform this slightly better than most males. It's not a gender thing, it's just most males have slightly tighter hamstrings. And then we move on to one of the more common exercises you may well see in the gym, which is the prone jackknife. So what we're looking at here is working the anterior core. You're going to be working the anterior hips as well, the hip flexors, shoulders, and also the tricep muscles to a much lesser degree just for stabilization. On the coaching side, again, it's all about maintaining the core and glutes in a braced position to maintain that normal lumbar curvature. In particular, when you extend the legs out, so you kind of bring your knees upwards into this hip flex position, and you don't really kind of need to worry about your glutes here because spine is relatively protected. It's more so when you extend the legs back, so a lot of people just tend to relax, and that's where they tend to kind of lose it. So you have to really focus on, as you're pushing your feet back to this plank position, that you keep the core and glutes nice and braced, and you don't lose it at the end point. The other thing we tend to see as a major error is hips rising up into the air, and this is usually due to the coaching point of bring your knees up to your chest, and when you coach to bring the knees up to the chest, hips always rise up towards the ceiling. We roughly want to keep the hips level with the shoulders at a kind of position that they start off. So to coach someone to bring the knees up towards the forearms or almost to kind of brush the kneecaps against the floor, then you'll find that you actually kind of keep the hips down low. Very simple, but very infrequently coached. Again, the regression, start further back, less pendulum swing. To progress it, move them further forwards, and you'll get more pendulum swing resistance. We can also add crunches, rotations, and other kind of additional movements, and we'll go through some of those variations in some of the following slides. So here we see the jackknife in action, and we'd always start by teaching someone to do the jackknife just to 90 degrees so they can show us, so they can maintain this kind of good lumbar curvature. If they bring the knees to kind of 90 degrees and their spine's already flexed, then it may indicate mobility restrictions or just kind of poor lumbar control whilst they're flexing and extending the hips. So we want you to be able to maintain that normal lumbar curvature. Once you can do that, then we can progress the exercise, and we'll show you some of these progressions now. So we could then add spinal flexion to it. So we do the jackknife, but we come up much further, and you add another kind of crunch into it. So you can see knees up to kind of 90 degrees is normal, and then as the knees come up further, the only way to perform that is by flexing at the spine and really kicking in more anterior core, kind of rectus abdominis musculature. Again, we want to focus on good lumbar position as the feet extend back to that start position. We're going to get more anterior core overload with this variation. Then we have jackknife with rotation. So what we're going to do here is you coach it to bring both knees up and to one side or to one elbow. So you're getting both hip flexion, spinal flexion, and also spinal rotation now. This is, again, very common, very popular exercise. If you're looking at kind of exercises that people will feel when they do it, this is a very good exercise to do. And again, we can add more resistance to this just simply by adjusting the start position. So we'd get people to do this slightly slower just to maintain good control. And then we can look at increasing the speed, and we'll show you that with a little variation in a second. So the advanced version of this is we do it at a much quicker velocity. So you bring both knees up to one side. The advanced progression as well is as you bring your knees up to that side, you're also just going to very quickly try and lift the hand off the ground and control it. It's a difficult one to perform. You can alternate sides. You can perform the whole set all on one side, as you're going to see with the kind of video here. But taking that one hand off the ground at the same time does increase the instability. Has to be done quickly, as you can't really perform this at a very slow velocity. And then one of the lesser performed variations is more of a frog kick. So you kind of come up like a normal jackknife, and then as you're in that kind of mid position, you then bring the knees and the feet apart as if you're performing almost like a kind of breaststroke. It's not actually a breaststroke, but very kind of similar to like a breaststroke kick. So the feet come out and then come back together to that start/finish position. And then again, so with the first part, knees are together, and then once you get into the jackknifed position and you're flexed, then the feet move apart. A little bit more abductor and adductor activation is what you'll get here with this variation. So just to talk through some of the other variations you can do with a kind of jackknife. So these jackknife variations can also be performed with a single leg. So you could do a single leg jackknife. So effectively you take one leg out and then you perform that jackknife. We can also do the same thing with a crunch and also the same thing with rotation. The question always comes up when we're teaching this is, what do you do with the free leg? Well, the free leg, you can kind of do one of two things. It can either be kept extended throughout, so just straight and behind, or you can kind of move it like the suspended leg as if both feet were in the straps. Either variation are perfectly acceptable. And again, same type of thing like we had with the single leg plank, is it does make it harder because you only have the kind of the stability on that suspended leg. The other one is not really providing you with any benefit at all. We can also do an alternating jackknife movement, or some people will call them like mountain climbers, things like that. We were just referred to them as an alternating jackknife. So as you see with the image in the background, we can do this slow. So you bring one knee up, brief pause, and then extend back. And you can either just do one leg and then come all the way back to the start position, or you bring one leg up and then as that one's extending back, the other one's extending forward, kind of like a very slow sprinting type motion if you like. Or we can do these at a very quick velocity. So again, very fast feet, fast knees, and that alternating action. Doing them fast is just going to give us a much greater metabolic effect. So like with any progression, start off slow, make sure someone can do it with correct technique, and then you can always increase the velocity to increase the metabolic effect afterwards. And then we have complexes. So what we can do is we can link or integrate the jackknife with other exercises to form complexes. So what we mean by a complex is you kind of do one movement and then another movement straight away, like a squat into an overhead press movement. So with this, we would do the full jackknife movement, and then when you're back into the plank position, you perform a press up, or you do your jackknife and then into a Spider-Man press up, or you do one jackknife repetition and then into an extending plank. And you can kind of integrate any of the exercises that we've just kind of covered. So rather than doing maybe a whole set just of jackknives, you might kind of do almost like a 5 or 6 exercise complex. So we do one jackknife, one pike, one extending plank, and then one rotation to the left, jackknife with rotation to the left, one jackknife with rotation to the right, and then just repeat that little complex of anterior core exercises. Okay, so this is the end of part 1 of this section. If you go to part 2 or second presentation, you can kind of follow the additional core exercises and static stretches that we'll go through in this second part.